the beauty of how exercise works is that exercise is actually a stress. It's the quintessential stress. I mean, I think we understand that at some level, right? Because we all think of when we go to the gym and we lift weights, we know we create micro tears and it's in the recovery that we develop hypertrophy in our muscles. Exercise also creates oxidative stress in our body. It creates metabolic stress. And how that works is that when we release reactive oxygen species, there's just a small enough amount that it ramps up our antioxidant defenses. That is one of the ways that exercise helps us. The other really cool way is how it activates our metabolic pathways. So when we exercise, we rapidly deplete energy, right? It creates a form of metabolic stress. And we have a fuel sensor, this AMPK pathway, right? AMP, activated protein kinase pathway. And it's like a fuel sensor. And when it senses red, when our energy is depleted, which happens with exercise, what happens as a result is our body turns on these molecular switches. So all these stressors ultimately turn on different molecular switches. These molecular switches ramp up different gene programs. And that's what happens in the stress resistant state when we endure stress. And it's in the recovery that we actually, express the genes, we create the products, the reconfiguration, the remodeling that happens. In this scenario, with the metabolic stress and the activation of the AMPK pathway, we turn on the PGC1 alpha gene, which is the gene that kind of stimulates mitochondrial biogenesis. So that stress of energy depletion turns on our body's ability and need for creating more mitochondria, right? And, in biology class, I think we have this picture that every cell has like this one mitochondria and it's the power plant of the cell, right? But in reality, cells can have thousands of mitochondria, right? It's like almost mind-blowing, right? This capacity for energy generation our cells have. And exercise can actually, you adapt to the conditions you put your body under. So when you create a stress, your body adapts to that stress so that the next time you encounter that same stress, you're better able to handle it. I mean, that's the whole idea behind hormesis. You're building resilience. And in this scenario, you're building your energy base. And at the end of the day, every function in our body requires energy. And mitochondrial dysfunction, I think, is the disease of our lifetime now, right? About, you've seen the 2022 study that I think gets quoted pretty often, that 93% of Americans have poor metabolic health. And when cells are underpowered from mitochondrial dysfunction, they can't do their job, right? If that cell, if you picture, an assembly line and you create defective mitochondria coming out of that assembly line. And let's picture that as being like a bad, faulty battery. And now you put that battery in every household item coming off of, different assembly lines. None of them are going to work, right? Because their energy is faulty. And when that cell enters our brain and our brains, can't produce energy, which is done entirely off of mitochondria, we can't make good decisions. People call it mental fog, but it's really this lack of mental clarity. We cannot regulate stress, right? And this is ultimately, as we were talking about, how there's this convergence between psychological resilience and physical resilience, because ultimately, if our mitochondria are underpowered, we can't regulate our mood. We can't effectively kind of use our cognitive capacity in our optimal way. So to me, this is why the exercise piece is so critical. It's the cellular level. And one thing that is really fascinating is that high intensity has a very unique benefit, because the more rapidly you create that stressful scenario in our cells, so you rapidly deplete energy levels, you get a much stronger adaptation. So you get more mitochondrial biogenesis. And what's really cool is that there are studies that are showing that at a zone 2, at a moderate intensity, you get a higher volume of mitochondria. So it is effective for mitochondrial biogenesis, but it's at the high intensity that you get mitophagy, the actual clearing of damaged mitochondria to create the efficiency. So essentially you're taking, cells from fixed energy to a renewable energy source. And then you're taking out the bad emissions, right? Yeah. And you're creating this incredible energy source inside every cell in your body. And then what that does for human health is really just profound from a preventive standpoint, because at the end of the day, so much of chronic disease is cellular dysfunction.
Absolutely.
Right? It's mitochondrial dysfunction. It's damage to our DNA. It's impaired autophagy.
Yeah.
And I think as we come to understand disease as cellular dysfunction, we realize how important it is to do these habits that create that cellular health.
How does exercise, well, I know that exercise increases BDNF in the brain and that helps make new neural pathways, but is that also mitochondrially driven, or how does that pathway work?
Yeah, and this kind of hits at the heart of, we've spoken so much about the stress, but I think it's so important to emphasize that the recovery is just as important as the stress. So the stress without the recovery, you don't get the gains. So in the process of stress, we release growth factors like brain-derived neurotrophic factor, the BDNF. And we release BDNF from exercise, right, in the brain and skeletal muscle during exercise. We also release BDNF from sauna. We release it from intermittent fasting, right? So from a lot of these hormetic stressors. In the stress phase, we kind of, again, set ourselves up to do the healing and regeneration. The growth factors like BDNF help us achieve that growth and proliferation of healthier cells. In the brain, it improves the synaptic connectivity. It creates neurogenesis, so we create more brain cells. And so it is, yet another way that we benefit. So we're not only making the mitochondria in our neurons healthier for better decision-making, better stress regulation, but we're also releasing the brain-derived neurotrophic factor that's improving the synaptic connections between these healthier cells and creating more of these brain cells. So it's, again, like you said in the very beginning, it's hard to recreate this through supplements, right? Because the pathways by which we benefit are so complex, so synergistic, and the magnitude of how much of our genome relies on physical activity is really dramatic, right? Because energy and balancing energy was the biggest threat to our existence, right? So much of our biology centers around energy creation, energy expenditure, and how to balance those two.